The Philadelphia Board of Elections processed hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots with zero civilian oversight or observation. The Board of Elections erected a fence approximately 50 feet into the hall that ran the length of the room. All observers were corralled behind the fence. More than 100 board workers processed and opened mail-in ballots on the other side of the fence. These masked workers were arranged throughout the 120,000 square feet at a distance from the observers of about 10 feet to more than 200 feet away from us. At least 96% of the board workers were processing mail-in ballots 15 to 200 plus feet from us. Due to the distance of the workers from the erected fences, it was impossible for me or any observer to see what the workers were doing with any type of specificity. The observers were not able to challenge any decision or determination being made about the processing of these mail-in ballots. No civilian oversight over hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots, zero opportunity for observers to observe, challenge, or inspect the mail-ins being opened. I find this to be an issue and to be irregular. Move on to the second point, the pink highlighted duplicate ballots, which I haven't heard about, at least not in the media. As the weeks progressed, the observers were informed that the board was going to be duplicating damaged mail-in ballots that could not be read by the scanners. I was told that there were more than 5,000 of these damaged ballots. I was also told that the actual number was unknown and could be much higher. The process for duplicating these ballots was for two workers to work as a pair. One worker reading out loud what was marked on the original damaged ballot, and the second worker using a pink highlighter to mark the choice on the duplicate ballot. The board's plan then was to run the pink highlighted ballots through the scanners where they would be counted as votes. The board workers did this pink highlighter duplication work over the course of a couple days until thousands of ballots were duplicated with these pink highlighters. On Thursday, November 12th, the observers were informed that the pink highlighter could not be read by the scanners. They all had to be done again. All of the duplicated mail-in ballots had to be fixed. And the Philadelphia Board of Elections' solution to this problem was to give the workers who were working alone, individually, stacks of hundreds of what amounted to blank mail-in ballots. And the workers, individually, were to fill in the correct highlighted ovals with dark pen. No observation. They were marking thousands of blank mail-in ballots. The workers did this double recreation work for hours before the observers realized what was going on, because we weren't told what was going on. Only when the observers confronted the deputy commissioner about this irregularity was a system set up where the workers would show the observers each double recreated mail-in ballot by flashing it at them for a second from a distance of 6 to 20 feet away, for as good as that was. Thousands of mail-in ballots were ultimately counted in this way. Again, I find this to be an issue and to be irregular.
The afternoon of Election Day, I went to the down to the warehouse to be a canvasser, as a Republican representative, to be able to watch them open the mail-in ballots. And as the gentleman Justin just described, as I was led back to the area where we were able to view them opening the mail-in ballots, we were kept in a corral that was at least 15 to 20 feet from any of the representatives, and that was the closest people opening the ballots. There were people that were 50, 100 feet from us. The closest that was 20 feet about, and you could not see at all the envelope, the ballot itself, where they were stacking them, anything that was required that we were able to see. There were also monitors up around the area. The monitors were pathetic, to be honest. They were fuzzy, looked like they were using old technology as far as, we have the most clearest televisions created, in the world now, and these were, probably from the 60s. You're looking at all these multiple cameras, screenshots put together of people opening ballots, but you could not even see at all or witness anything if anything was any misdoing or anything going wrong.
These pop-up voter sites were placed in heavily Democrat cities, including Chester and Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, in which case the grant money from the CTCL was used to pay for electioneering. It was literally a one-stop shop. Walk in, apply, get your ballot, submit, and you were out the door. But where this didn't take place was in heavily Republican and independent areas. The counting center was on the first floor, in which there were multiple places to bring in ballots in and out of, elevators and many rooms in which workers had access. I was there for 3 straight days. What became of concern was the back room, which had no observers, no line of sight or transparency into the process. There was no cooperation, complete resistance from election night and every day after. It took until our lawyer got an injunction to get into that back room in which pre-canvassing was transpiring. We were granted 5 minutes every 2 hours, and the setup was sitting in a chair 20 feet from any physical ballot.
I'm a father, a family man. I was a former commanding officer and executive officer in the Navy. I'm a data scientist. I'm a forensic computer scientist. I'm an expert in security and fraud. Quite a few people had done mail-in ballots. So they came in and they hadn't been updated in the Delaware County database yet. So they would come in and say, the database is not showing me on the database, I'd like to vote. So the process, one of the processes was to give them a provisional ballot. And then they would vote provisionally, and then later on their vote would be sorted out. That didn't happen. I observed, and the gentleman that was with me observed 7 different polls where the people were given a regular ballot. So they cast a vote and put it in. That somewhat spurred me to go down to the counting center, which Leah described. It's on the Seaport Ave. It's a remote building. We weren't allowed to get in until 11 o'clock at night, and we had to get some legal help to get us in. So it took us 5 hours to get upstairs. What I saw as a forensics expert was an election process that was forensically destructive in the manner it was conducted, with the envelopes being separated from the ballots and gone to the other side of the room. What I saw there was a chain of custody in all cases that was broken. It was broken for the mail-in ballots, the drop box ballots, the election day USB V-card flash drives. In all cases, the chain of custody and the procedures that were defined by the Delaware County Board of Elections and Election Process Review they didn't follow one. So I personally observed USB V-cards being uploaded to the voting machines by the voting machine warehouse supervisor on multiple occasions. I saw this personally. I brought it to the attention of the deputy sheriff who was there stationed, who was a senior law enforcement officer, and I brought it to the attention of the clerk of elections. I brought it to their attention. I objected, and I said, this person is not being observed. He's not part of the process that I can see, and he's walking in with baggies, which we have pictures of, and it was submitted in our affidavits, and he was sticking these USBs into the machines. So I personally witnessed that happened 24 times, over 24 times. We have multiple other witnesses that saw it, including Democrat poll watchers. And we were told, I was told the next day by the attorney that we had secured, that they said every election they leave a couple of USBs in the voting machines and they're brought back, and generally the warehouse manager comes over and puts them in. So in talking to the U.S. Attorney General McSwain and other law enforcement officers, I found out that was not the case, that generally more than 2 is unusual. So they denied they did it, but as of today, 47 USB V cards are missing, and they're nowhere to be found. Those cards, I demanded that they didn't update the vote live time. They only updated it about once every 2 or 3 hours. I demanded they updated the vote so I could see what the result was, and it was 50,000 votes. And I think as a computer scientist, an American, and a patriot, it doesn't matter who those 50,000 votes were. I'll tell you they were for Vice President Biden. But what was shocking to me as an American, as someone who has gone to sea, gone to war, that that could even happen. On Thursday, it took us 3 days for them to obey the court order that I secured with Leah's help and the help of the Thomas More Society. They got the order for us to get in and watch it, look at the back offices, which were locked, for 5 minutes every 2 hours. I went in, I was the first one allowed to go in at 1:30 on Thursday, and then again at 3:30 for 5 minutes. What I observed in the locked room in the back office was 70,000 unopened mail-in ballots. They were in boxes of 500, stacked in neatly. The gentleman that came in with me was a Democrat poll watcher, is a forensic pathologist, a very detailed, very dedicated man, and he took meticulous notes as well. And I verified with him, are you seeing what I'm seeing? We both agreed as GOP poll watchers and a Democrat poll watcher that we had witnessed 60 to 70,000. We had a little bit of a disagreement there. The problem with that was by that time, the mail-in ballots had already been counted. So 120,000 mail-in ballots had already been counted, posted, and done. So my question is, where do the 70,000 ballots go? And nobody knows. We have a picture in here of a large number of boxes that I took that were filled with what appeared to be ballots, sitting by the Blue Crest machine. They were there for about 3 hours, and then they disappeared. When we finally got into the back room where the votes were being ingested, as a data scientist, I want to see where the data is coming in. And I wanted to know the universe of the votes. Well, the universe of the votes was only supposed to be 120,000 mail-in ballots. We were told there were 6,000 ballots remaining. So I said, okay, we have a universe of 126,000 votes. And then when I get back there, the universe wasn't 126,000 votes. The universe was 200,000 votes. So that's a problem. We just learned 2 days ago that virtually all chain of custody logs, records, yellow sheets, everything was gone. All forensic evidence, all custody sheets in Delaware County are gone. They had a signing party where they sat down, and poll workers were invited back to recreate those logs, and our understanding as of today was that they were unsuccessful in getting them all.
So at the very beginning of the chart where there's a circle, it says on election day, what that indicates is there is a spike in loaded votes, 337,000 plus or minus some votes that were added in there in one big batch. So that was an anomaly in the reporting. Normally you would expect to see a smooth curve going up, not any big spikes. That's kind of what Greg was talking about, the anomalies of loading and uploading those votes. So that big spike that occurs there is a prime indicator of fraudulent voting.
And that's 604,000 votes in 90 minutes, is that right?
Correct. This is 337 votes, 337,000 votes in that
period of time.
Yes.
And when you look at this entire curve with all these spikes, can you calculate how much of a vote that accounted for Biden and how much for Trump?
Close to 600,000. I think our figures were about 570 some odd thousand that all those spikes represent over time.
For Biden?
Correct.
And how much for Trump?
I think it was a little over 3,200.
This is the part that is a mystery. Mailed ballots sent out, 1,823,148. But when you go to the final count of the vote, there are 2,589,242 mail-in ballots. How do you account for the 700,000 mail-in ballots that appeared from nowhere?
I was issued a watcher certificate to be the watcher for President Donald Trump. This certificate authorized the individual to watch in any ward or division in Philadelphia. So we went to a place which happened to be a funeral parlor where they were doing the election. Two poll workers, I don't know who they were wearing masks and everything. I produced a certificate, and she starts saying it's not good here. I tried to explain this watcher certificate is for the city of Philadelphia. You're in the city of Philadelphia. and you have to let me observe. I'm the eyes and ears of the President of the United States, and they wouldn't allow that.
We recruited 50 individuals that were willing to come and canvass or come and monitor the pre-canvass, and along with 25 other out-of-state lawyer volunteers. 2 days before the election, the Friday before the election, we got a call from the Electoral Board and said, oh, by the way, you need to submit everybody's credentials in advance, and you need to have everybody's signatures on the credentials that you sign in advance. Needless to say, we lost about 20, 25 folks that we were unable to get the credentials to in advance. And at the time when we arrived, we were herded into what's best known as the corral. I'm sure you've kind of seen or heard about those things. It was a fenced-in area that was the fence was maybe 2.5, 3 feet high. Closest anybody could get was maybe 15, 20 feet from the closest ballot processor to the maybe 150 feet. Mail-in ballots were coming into that room already sliced open at the top. We have no idea when or where the slicing took place, where the opening took place, or what was in fact inside those ballots, inside those mail-in envelopes. Secrecy envelopes would go to another slicing machine, and that'd be sliced open. And at that point, then the ballots would come back, and they'd be divided from the secrecy envelopes. There was a machine, and the machine would be apparently sorting things by the barcodes. And then eventually, somehow or other, people would come in with big armloads of ballots from the other room. Apparently with no provenance, no explanation of where they came from. There was about 6 machines where they were feeding the ballots. As they would go in, 2 or 3 would kick out to a different tray than the other tray. And workers sometimes would take the ones that weren't kicked out and put them in a stack, and then sometimes you'd run all of them through again, and sometimes run 2 or 3. We never had any idea if they were zeroing out a machine, what they were doing. And so at one point I asked the county solicitor, I said, can you describe for me the journey of a ballot from the time it hits the door to the time that it's counted? Where does it go? What's the process, et cetera? I had a short answer, no. I then asked him, I said, can you give me any written protocol? And he said, no, we have no written protocol for what we're conducting, what we're doing here. He's supposed to be the one giving legal advice to people on how to legally handle ballots.
I went to the voting polls on November the 3rd to vote in person. I waited 2 hours in line, and when I went in, I showed identification, and I was taken up to the polling place. The polling man showed me what to do, turned it on, and said, go ahead. I voted, and I printed it out, and when I got it and I looked at it, Trump was not on there. I voted for Trump, and it wasn't there. My daughter, I called her over, and I said to her, look, his vote is gone. I voted for him. So I called a poster over, and he said, it's not supposed to be seen. It's for privacy. Just put it through the scanner and you're done. It bothered me. It's been bothering me since, because I voted, and was it counted or was it flipped? I don't know.
We went to the pollster that was there and asked him why the president and vice president's name did not print out when all the other names of the candidates printed out that my mother had voted for. It seemed very strange, but not knowing any better, we asked, well, what is the next step? He said to put it through the scanner. So that's what we did, and we left, and it seemed very odd. Then I went to where I live in Drums, Pennsylvania, which is about 10 miles south of where my mother voted. And I voted, no problem. Everything printed out just as, it should. And I scanned it through. So it just seemed very odd. And we wanted to report that in my mother's area, which was Fairview Township, it seemed very odd that it did not print out.
I'm pretty good with computers. I made my choices. I printed it out. And he said, now you have to put it in the scanner. And I'm wondering, well, a scanner works face down when you scan, because I have one at home. Do I put it in face down or face up? So he's already across the room talking to another gentleman that's about 20 years older than me, trying to tell him how to do it. And I said, are these face up or face down? And he just nodded. He didn't say either way. He just nodded yes. So I put it in face up. So I don't even know if it scanned the blank backside or the voting top side.
I'm a registered Democrat, and I just wanted to help and make sure it was a fair election. I don't care who wins. I care that it's a fair election. Immediately, I was met with a hostile attitude from all of the people that I had to work with. That would be the majority inspector, the poll watcher, the machine operator, and a committee man who was electioneering in the polls. He was wearing shirts and a hat and a mask for who to vote for. We are about like an hour and a half in the morning. We have a long line of people. We must have had, I don't know, 60 people in line in the building, snaking around the building. And a woman came up and said, I'd like to turn in my mail-in ballot so that I can vote in the booth. And the girl who was clerking for me said, well, if you want to turn in your mail-in ballot, we're going to need to have you fill out this form. And the majority inspector, I'm sorry, not the majority inspector, the judge of elections, my apologies. She had gone home. And to my understanding, the judge of elections is not to leave the polling place. The man who was electioneering and was a poll watcher, but also a committee man, confronted myself and the clerk and said, you don't know what you're talking about. Anybody can sign the affidavit. Why don't you stop trying to cause problems? Why don't you shut up? Started getting in my face, cursing at me, telling me that I needed to be quiet, that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I should just learn to sit down and not say anything and just let it happen. And my clerk and I said, no, we're not going to let that happen. That's ridiculous. It says very clearly in our training and on this sheet that an affidavit needs to be signed by the judge of elections if somebody's going to turn in a mail-in ballot before they can go vote in the booth. We made her wait. Finally, the judge of elections came back. Not, of course, before he was threatening me. The majority inspector threatened to slap me in the face. And he told me that it was going to become a quote unquote racial issue. I'm not really sure why that would become a racial issue. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with following procedure and making sure it's an honest election. I felt threatened. I called my ward leader. The ward leader then called the commissioner for Philadelphia, Al Schmidt. Al Schmidt had me call and report that to the DA. And then about an hour and a half after that, the majority inspector told me that she wanted to vote because we had a lull in people coming to the polls, so it was pretty quiet. And I looked her name up so that she could sign the book, and it said that she needed to remit her mail-in ballot or vote provisionally. She said, oh, I threw that in the trash. And I said, well, then you have to vote provisionally. And the machine operator and the same committee man / poll watcher who was electioneering that I mentioned before got up in my face again, told me that I didn't belong there, that I needed to shut up, started cursing expletives at me again, told me that they were going to allow her to do that and that I better be quiet about it. And then they let her go into the polls and vote, and she did not vote provisionally at all. She voted. And who knows, maybe she voted twice. Not to mention, it wasn't until I had actually called our ward leader, who had called the commissioner, who had called the DA, that they then sent representatives down to discuss this with me and defend me. I mean, I had maybe 6 men there because I was being threatened in the polling place. And the committee man that I mentioned earlier, who was threatening me, then got his cousin involved, who was working the polls as a poll watcher and was also wearing electioneering gear. She got up in my face, demanded to see my credentials, then tried to refuse to give them back to me, told me that they were illegitimate minority inspector certificates. They basically told me they were going to call my council rep and he was going to come down and make me leave. Just ridiculous threats. Until we had the deputy sheriff come down and tell us how to actually receive a mail-in ballot and how to vote provisionally, we were not doing it correctly. The judge of elections was not doing it correctly. And I cannot stress this enough. My brother had the same role as me as a minority inspector in a different polling place. And he said they were not doing it correctly either. I don't think that anybody actually really knew how to receive a mail-in ballot. Most of the books that we had to get your authorized signature, some would have a remit ballot little box that you could click, and others didn't have that at all. So if somebody came in and remitted a ballot, I'd almost have to like hand write that in just to keep it as honest as possible. There was no place for that. So I don't see really how they were keeping track of that, because you could easily do both. And I mean, it happened in front of me. My majority inspector definitely voted and then went into the polls and voted again.